Hi, everyone. Welcome so far. We have a couple minutes remaining before we get started. So it'll probably be just shortly after 7 that we'll kick it off. Thanks to everyone who has joined so far. I'm going to give it another couple minutes before we get started with the meeting, just to give everyone a chance to log in. All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the information webinar for the City of Hamilton Stormwater Fee and Stormwater Financial Incentive Program. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your evening to participate. This evening is an opportunity to introduce you to the program and answer your questions. My name is Alicia Evans. I am a facilitator with ACOM, and I will be your host. As we start today, I would like to acknowledge that the City of Hamilton is situated on the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabeg to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase, 1792, between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today, the City of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so that we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. Okay, so I would like to run through a few housekeeping items before we review the agenda. So as you can probably see, we are using Zoom's webinar platform this evening. So in this platform, all attendees are muted and you will not have access to your video. So this means that we will invite your participation through the Q&A box. Now you can access this feature through the menu bar by hovering your mouse over the screen. And if you are using a smartphone or a tablet, you can just simply tap on the screen and the menu bar should pop up. So no other attendees will be able to see the questions that you submit, and there is also an option to submit the questions anonymously to the project team. Now, we know that technology issues can and do happen, so we appreciate your patience with us if anything should go wrong. And if you yourself are having any issues, please feel free to also use the Q&A box to ask for help. Alan will monitor this throughout the meeting and do his best to help you out. And finally, this webinar is being recorded. All of the Q&A will remain anonymous to avoid any privacy concerns. So as I mentioned, the purpose of the meeting today is to introduce you to the Stormwater Incentive Program and answer your questions. So following this introduction, there will be an overview presentation that covers stormwater and stormwater management, including the city's stormwater management system and how it is currently paid for, and how that will actually be changing in 2025 with the stormwater fee. The presentation will outline the proposed draft in Stormwater Incentive Program and also how you can provide your feedback into that program. And following the presentation, we will address your questions. Please feel free to ask your questions throughout the presentation, but we will hold off on responding until after the presentation is complete. All right, I will now turn it over to Nancy Hill from AECOM to introduce the project team and kick off the presentation.
Thank you, Alicia. Hello, I'm Nancy Hill from AECOM, and I've been supporting the city with this project. And I'll be presenting the rest of the slides for you today. I'm joined by John Savoya, Katie Black, Carrie Vanderperk, and Nick Winters from the City of Hamilton, who will be available to answer any questions you may have at the end of the presentation. Okay. So we will be using the term stormwater a lot in this presentation. So what is stormwater? When land is forested and undeveloped, most of the rain and melting snow is absorbed by vegetation in the soil where it replenishes aquifers. But as the land is cleared and then developed, less rain and melting snow is absorbed and more of it runs off. And it's this runoff that we refer to as stormwater or stormwater runoff. When as this land develops and as stormwater runoff is generated, municipalities such as the City of Hamilton must construct stormwater systems in order to manage this runoff. Hamilton's stormwater system consists of over $3 billion of natural and engineered infrastructure. This includes 1,500 kilometers of ditches, 1,200 kilometers of storm sewers, and 148 kilometers of water courses. If you were to stretch those assets end on end, they would stretch all the way from Hamilton to the Mexican border. There is also a number of other assets that are listed here. The city must regularly inspect, clean, repair, and replace this infrastructure to make sure that stormwater runoff, is properly managed. Because if it's not properly managed, problems can occur. Excessive runoff that can be caused by an increase in development or by extreme weather events can cause erosion, and the debris from this erosion can build up and block creeks. Sediment and other pollutants washed off streets and yards can pollute natural water bodies, such as our creeks, Cootes Paradise, and Lake Ontario. And extreme weather events combined with infrastructure that was built many years ago to the design standards of the day can cause road or basement flooding. And finally, as our infrastructure ages, it needs to be replaced. Infrastructure that fails before it can be replaced can cause sinkholes or blockages. So how does the City of Hamilton currently fund its stormwater management program? Most of the funding for stormwater comes from the water utility. About 70% of the stormwater funding comes from drinking water consumption. And so a smaller amount of funding also comes from property taxes, where properties contribute based on their assessed value. So this means that properties with lots of paved areas, such as a parking lot, will contribute very little funding towards the city's stormwater program, even though they create a lot of stormwater runoff. It also means that a small property that consumes a lot of water, such as a laundromat, will contribute more to the city's stormwater program than a large parking lot. And when I say contribute more, I mean financially, not in terms of runoff. Recognizing this inequity in stormwater funding, the city decided to look at alternative stormwater funding models. This slide here summarizes the work completed and the decisions over the last year to address this inequity in stormwater funding. In June 2022, Council directed staff to conduct a review of the city's current stormwater funding model and to look at alternative models and report back in June 2024. In November, Council approved 5 guiding principles to be used in the evaluation of stormwater funding models for the City of Hamilton. The objective of the 5 guiding principles, which are listed here on the slide, was to find a stormwater funding model that would be fair and equitable in how it charges users, would help build resilience to climate change and promote environmentally sustainable stormwater practices, be affordable to property owners and provide the city with the means to manage the stormwater system in a financially sustainable manner, be justifiable and transparent to users, and finally be simple enough so that it wasn't too costly to administer. In January of this year, Council directed staff to accelerate the review and report back by June of 2023. When staff did report back in June of this year, Council approved a new stormwater fee structure that met these 5 guiding principles. Council also directed staff to consult the public on a financial incentive program, and today's presentation is part of that consultation. It's important to note that this new stormwater funding model represents a shift in how property owners contribute to the city's stormwater system. And so properties already contribute to stormwater funding. This new model just changes how they contribute to stormwater funding. Before we go further, we'll use the term impervious a lot, impervious surfaces or impervious area. So it's important to define that term. So impervious areas are hard surfaces that prevent rainfall and melting snow to be absorbed by vegetation and the soil. So this includes roofs, asphalt driveways, concrete walkways, compacted gravel, and pavers, unless they were specifically designed for infiltration. So what is this new stormwater funding model that has been approved by Council? So the idea is that what a property contributes is based on its hard surfaces and not based on its water consumption. Okay, so the revenues collected through the water and wastewater utilities will no longer be used to fund stormwater management. The stormwater fee for so for single-family detached homes or any type of triplex townhome, anything that has less than 6 units, will be using averages. So it's the average impervious area for that residential type. And we'll go into a little more detail about that later on. And for larger properties, commercial, institutional, industrial, and residential buildings that have more than 6 units, their charge will be determined based on the measured impervious area. And this is determined using aerial photography. So again, as previously stated, the new fee structure represents a shift in stormwater funding. So revenue collected from wastewater rates will no longer be used for stormwater. And so Council has approved that wastewater rates will be restated when the stormwater fee is implemented. So many properties will actually see a decrease in their wastewater fees with this new stormwater funding model. So how do you determine a stormwater fee with this new model? So first, it starts with the number of billing units. And you take this and multiply it by the rate for 1 billing unit, and then that's how you determine a fee. So how do you determine the number of billing units? So what we determined is that 1 billing unit is the average impervious area for a house in the city of Hamilton. And the idea behind that is, so for instance, if you're a commercial property, and you have the equivalent amount of hard surface as 4 houses, then you would pay 4 times more than the average house. Okay. And to keep things simple, because there's over 125,000 houses, single family detached homes in the city of Hamilton, another 45,000 residential units, townhomes, duplexes, things like that. We decided for anything that has less than 7 units, we'll just charge them based on the average of that residential type. So all homes will pay 1 billing unit. Because townhomes and duplexes, each unit has about half the impervious area of the average home, they pay half a billing unit per dwelling unit. Triplexes, quadplexes, sixplexes would pay 30% because that is what their typical impervious area is. And then any residential buildings that have more than 6 units or any industrial, commercial, or institutional properties would pay based on their actual measured impervious area. And the rates are determined annually by council, similar to water or wastewater rates. So when the fee gets introduced in 2025, at some point towards the end of 2024, council will approve the rates for 1 billing unit. As previously mentioned, because stormwater funding will no longer come from the water wastewater rates, the water wastewater rates will be restated. So for the average home that consumes 200 cubic meters of water a year, their fee will actually go down by 11%, and they'll see about a savings of about $124. And these calculations are based on averages and rates that have been approved in principle for 2025. Detailed numbers will be determined at the end of 2024. So we've come to you today and throughout the month to get feedback on the proposed Stormwater Financial Incentive Program. So the idea is that an incentive program encourages property owners to reduce their impact on the natural and the engineered stormwater system. Okay, so there are various ways of doing that. One way is to provide credits. So the idea behind that is you would actually get a reduction in your stormwater fee if you implement and maintain measures on your site that reduce the amount or improve the quality of stormwater that runs off your property. The other type of financial incentives are grants and subsidies. And these are ways that to encourage measures to be implemented. So where it's a reduced cost, so you can provide a grant or a rebate, and it's a way to provide upfront savings to implement stormwater measures on site. And I'll go into more details about this in the next couple of slides. So for residential properties that have less than 6 units, so those are your multiplexes, your average single-family detached home, townhomes, things like that, the city has proposed grants and subsidies. And this list here shows some examples of what that could include. So reduced cost, so discounted rain barrels or rebates for the installation of backwater valves or for disconnecting your roof leaders. The city is also investigating subsidizing programs that provide workshops and online information and in-person coaches and on how to install on-site stormwater measures on your property, such as rain gardens and permeable pavements. Now for industrial, commercial, institutional, and larger residential buildings, the city is proposing to offer credits. And this is a reduction in a property's stormwater fee, again, if they implement and maintain measures on their site. More specifically, a property could reduce their stormwater fee by up to 40% by slowing down the rate at which stormwater runs off their site. So this is often accomplished through detention facilities such as stormwater ponds or cisterns. Additionally, a property could reduce their stormwater fee by up to 25% if they remove sediment, ammonia, or phosphorus from their runoff. This is often achieved through the use of oil grit separators or other treatment facilities such as filters. A property could reduce their stormwater fee by up to 40% if they reduce the volume of stormwater that runs off their site. So this is where you actually encourage either reuse the stormwater or encourage it to infiltrate into the ground. So this is often accomplished through green infrastructure, underground infiltration facilities, or water reuse facilities. And finally, a property owner could reduce their stormwater fee by up to 15% if they implement measures that prevent pollution. So implementing salt, pesticide, or manure management plans. Now, the proposal is that credits are cumulative up to a maximum of 50%. There are reasons why the proposed maximum credit is limited to 50%. And the reason is by managing stormwater on site, property owners can help restore the natural water balance, protect natural water bodies, and reduce the risk of downstream flooding. However, regardless of how much property owners manage their stormwater on site, the city must still maintain a stormwater system to service all developed properties, particularly during intense rainfall events that tend to overwhelm on-site measures. The city must also maintain a drainage system for the roadways that front each property and provide access to all the properties. So in order to cover these base fixed costs, the City of Hamilton, like many other Ontario municipalities with a stormwater credit program, have capped credits at 50%. Now, one question that we get quite a lot, so we thought we'd just answer it right up front, is why not provide credits for residential properties with less than 6 units? So we thought a lot about this. Now, the city is not proposing a credit program for residential properties with less than 7 units because the average home will likely pay less than $20 per month for stormwater. So providing a reduction, a savings of $5 per month is generally not enough of a financial incentive to offset the cost of implementing measures on site. However, it's probably better to provide grants and subsidies upfront that are worth hundreds of dollars, and this will be a greater incentive to homeowners to implement these measures. Also, given that there are 125,000 houses, another 45,000 dwellings with less than seven units, it's also more cost effective for the city to administer an overall grant and subsidy program than to manage credits for individual properties. And again, that goes back to the guiding principles of balancing equity and simplicity with the proposed stormwater funding model. So the timeline, so where do we go from here? The timeline for implementing this new stormwater funding structure is shown on this slide. Once the public consultation on the financial incentive program is complete, city staff will finalize a draft financial incentive program for council's review. So they will take this to council in early 2024. And even though the new stormwater funding structure doesn't get started until September 2025, the idea is to spend 2024 developing a financial incentive program, whatever is approved by council, and to have it in place early in 2025 so that property owners can get their credit applications in before the fee begins. And I think with that, I'll pass it back to you, Alicia, and then we can answer any questions that the attendees might have.
Okay, great. So as Nancy mentioned, the project team is seeking feedback on the proposed draft stormwater incentive program. So following this meeting, we do invite you to visit engage.hamilton.ca/stormwater incentives to complete the survey, if you haven't already done so, of course. And the survey will be open until December 3rd. So we're also hosting 2 in-person open houses next week. On November 15th, we will be at Hamilton City Hall in the council chambers from 6:30 to 8:30. And on November 16th, we will be at the Ancaster Fairgrounds in the Hepworth Room from 6 to 8 p.m. Now, both of these meetings will include a presentation and a question and answer period, very similar to what we've covered today. But please feel free to attend if you would like to meet with the project team in person. And of course, you can also find this information on the Engage Hamilton page. Okay, so let's go to the Q&A now. As a reminder, please ask your questions through the Q&A feature. If there are any questions that the project team is unable to answer or then we will post a response to your question on the Engage Hamilton page after the meeting. And it looks like we do have some questions to get started with. So what I'll do is I will read out the question and then turn it over to the panel to address. Okay, so looks like we have some questions related to rural properties. So the question is total impervious area calculation a fair and appropriate model to assess rural and urban properties similarly? Shouldn't there be a better way of assessing the benefit cost that considers factors such as total local infiltration area, the type of local drainage system, and legal access to a drainage system?
I'll maybe step in with that one because it's a great question, and it's something that came up early in our review. And so we actually did a specific review looking at rural versus urban areas. And so we did a lot of sampling of measuring of, for instance, rural homes versus urban homes. And what we found was that actually rural homes on average were twice as big as urban homes. And so if we went based on the impervious area measurements, what you would be charging rural homes twice as much. And and we kind of looked and said, is that being equitable? And so the decision, the recommendation of council and the decision council was no, charge all homes the same, and don't charge rural properties more. So, and then the other thing we did was take a look at, well, what are rural properties getting for their stormwater funding? So we took a look at the expenses and what the city spends on stormwater management in rural areas versus urban areas. And we found that the city actually spends more in rural areas than they collect in stormwater funding. So that there was actually, in some ways, urban areas were subsidizing rural areas. And I know that may not be a popular feeling. So, so the feeling was then to charge all homes the same, whether they're rural or urban, wasn't being unfair to rural properties. It was maybe, one might argue, was being a little unfair to urban properties, but the idea was just to go there and just charge everyone the same. And it's important to remember that there are drainage systems in the rural areas. They don't look the same, but they act, they provide similar services. And so there are ditches and creeks, and they require work, and they're culverts. And so that's why the fee proposes charging rural homeowners as well as urban homeowners. I think hopefully that answers the question.
I think we may have a similar question. I'll ask this now, and maybe Nancy, you've addressed it, but it says property owners who benefit from a municipal drain system are individually billed for installation and maintenance costs for these systems. Why should these property owners continue to pay for these stormwater management system and also pay for everybody else's?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the municipal drain system is, and I'm wondering if maybe, Nick, you want to talk to this a little bit. It is a separate system, or Carrie. You don't have to, I can, but you're the ones who met. Yeah.
No, I'm happy to jump in. Nick Winters, Director of Hamilton Water, for those that are online with us. So you're absolutely right. The municipal drain system is paid for by the users that benefit from that municipal drain system. The city does inspect those municipal drains annually as required by the legislation, but we very rarely, and actually I can tell you in my 19 years of experience working with Hamilton Water, we've never billed maintenance costs back to properties that are benefiting from a municipal drain at this point in time. But those properties are also in many areas contributing to watersheds, creeks, different discharge locations that are not associated with the municipal drain as well. One of the things that Nancy talked about with the implementation of the stormwater rate, as well as the guiding principles, is looking for systems that are they're not administratively burdensome, so that we're not charging ratepayers for an army of staff to be doing technical reviews and property by property assessments as well. And so, unweaving the ball of yarn of which properties are discharging where throughout the large rural areas of Hamilton would be very complex as well. And if we were to go to the put in the work to develop and implement a more cumbersome system, then we would find that the costs to administer the program are going to go up significantly as well too. So we're looking to find that balance in what is fair and equitable, what is the lowest cost to deliver a administrative program, as well as who is contributing to which stormwater infrastructure system.
Okay. Thanks, Nick. Okay, so another question here is, conservation authorities are already funded by general property tax levies. They provide regulatory oversight for flood protection and management of natural water systems for the benefit of all city properties. Why combine this budget item with the urban stormwater budget? What is unfair about the current conservation authority levy system?
Yeah, okay, I can start with this. So the idea behind is that all stormwater related expenditures, so whether it's conservation authority, stormwater expenditures that occur in urban areas or stormwater expenditures that occur in rural areas, you've got sort of the same staff working on stormwater management, no matter where it occurs, and that would be funded under the new stormwater fee. And so the idea is property taxes would no longer be used used to fund the conservation authorities. So that would come from the new stormwater utility. And why move the funding from that, from a property tax base to a stormwater base? Well, we're finding that a lot of the issues that the conservation authorities and that the cities are trying to address, are a result of things like erosion in creeks and pollution. And so the more that people control and manage their stormwater on site, the less of this work conservation authorities and the city has to do. So so we think that a stormwater funding program that is sort of that encourages properties to manage their stormwater on site will also benefit and ideally reduce the funding needs of the conservation authorities and the city. So that's why it's included in this fee.
Okay, thanks, Nancy. Anything from others to add to that?
The only thing that I might contribute is that earlier this year, as part of the implementation, sorry, I'm remembering it as early this year, but it might have been late last year, through one of the council motions related to the development of this program, council directed staff to move forward with a rate structure that included all costs associated with stormwater in the rate. So conservation authority fees, paying them for the services that they provide within our broader watersheds are included in those costs. And there's the potential that, staff may have brought back a recommendation to council at one point not to include those fees. But again, given the alignment with what the conservation authorities are doing across the watershed to support those natural drainage systems, it did make sense to include those costs as part of the stormwater rate as per that council direction.
Okay, great. Okay, we've got a number more questions here, so I'll keep going. Why would rural road ditching be transferred from the road maintenance budget to the stormwater budget? Roadside ditches are not riparian systems. The adjacent property owners may not collect and legally discharge water into a roadside ditch. The ditches and culverts are required to allow water to move from one side of the road allowance to the other, and also to manage runoff from the city's impervious road.
Yeah, I can take a stab at this, and then others can chime in. So yeah, ditches, they do take runoff from roadways, but they also take overland flow from properties. And you're right, you're not legally allowed to have a pipe connection, but there are many cases where there is volume of flow and also some pollutants that do run off properties and into the ditch systems. And then the ditch systems, farther down the system, the water from the ditches go into pipes, which go into creeks, and it all becomes sort of, when you look at it from a holistic one water perspective, it all kind of gets mixed together and ends up in the harbor together. So yeah, it would. So why look at it together? It's because it all lead ultimately to the same place. And when you're having quality issues and quantity issues within a creek, some of it might come from a ditch system, some of it might come from a pipe system, and to try and break it out maybe would be unnecessarily administrative. So treating all stormwater under one umbrella seems a better way of going about it.
And so I would just refer back to, my previous comments regarding direction from council as well. The ditch system across the non-urbanized areas of the city of Hamilton are important conduits for stormwater within the city. They do require maintenance, and based on council's desire to have all of our stormwater programs, infrastructure renewal and maintenance programs funded from one fee across the city, then those did need to be included as part of this rate as well.
Okay, thank you. So we have another question here. It says, don't rain gardens, rain barrels, and disconnected downspouts still spill surplus water into the ground? How then is this different from farm properties, which are already absorbing a lot of rainwater, but don't seem to be eligible for credits or incentives?
So yeah, I can speak to that. So farm properties have the same eligibility to incentive programs as non-farm properties. So if it is just a residential property, similar to any residential property, whether it's outside or inside the urban boundary, would have access to the same rebates and incentive programs. And likewise, if it is a farm property that is classified as sort of it's more commercial and has more buildings than just a home, then they could apply for a credits. So similar to a property within the urban boundary. Now, if properties, we gave some examples about rain gardens and rain barrels and disconnected downspouts. If there are other items that properties, and especially properties, farm properties or properties outside the urban boundary, would like to see, if there are other types of financial incentives or credits or subsidized programs that they would like to see, this is what we're here for, and this is what we hope to get. Any, fill out the survey, give your input, and maybe we didn't include something on the list that should be included within a residential financial incentive program.
Okay, thank you. Carrie, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks, Alicia. I just wanted to add to Nancy's comment as well, that farm properties could potentially carry pollutants into the groundwater that you wouldn't see in the within the urban boundary from farm operations, and also could have an impact on aquifers in the water table. And that could impact our source water as well, which the city is responsible for protecting. So there's that linkage there as well, and I just wanted to make mention of that.
We did have another question that was very similar, but I think you answered it. The question was, will rural properties that are not on city sewers be eligible for the same credits, the subsidies that urban residents will be eligible for? And it sounds like, yes, they will be.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, another question here, it's a statement and a question. So it says programs to provide research, education, outreach, and incentives that address farm water runoff quality related to erosion, manure, pesticide, and fertilizer have been in effect for many years by OMAFRA, MECP, and the conservation authorities in cooperation with farm organizations. So what expertise or new opportunities can be provided by the city that can justify any city stormwater expenditures?
Yeah, I'll try and address that one if I think if I understand the question, and others can chime in. So the idea behind the incentive program is to leverage. There are a lot of programs out there already, and is to leverage them. And we know that, as I say, there are a lot of great programs out there. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, but we are still having some issues with stormwater management, and there's still some water quality issues in rural areas, and so obviously there could be more that could be done to help property owners manage, especially from, as Carrie alluded to, from a quality perspective and pollutants. So if what is, maybe there's already information out there from the conservation authorities, but if what people need are workshops and in-person consultation, then maybe those are some of the things that we can help with. And also, the slide on credit program, we talked about credits for manure management. And so maybe by providing that extra up to a 15% credit for properties that develop and maintain a pesticide or manure management plan, maybe that's an extra incentive that will encourage all properties to do that.
Yeah, so I'll jump in there. I mean, it is a good question, and I would say, quite frankly, I mean, the city already has programs in place to assess some of these programs, particularly from a source water protection perspective. But we're not here to reinvent the wheel from a property assessment perspective. We are not here. We're looking for a program that's going to be, as simple but fair to administer on behalf of the city as possible. We're not looking to create, additional administrative hoops for members of our farming community here in Hamilton either. So where there's existing information programs in place, then we would just refer to those as part of the assessment for what is in place and how does that relate to the credit program that's been proposed.
Yeah, I would like to just add as well in relation to the Hamilton Harbor Remedial Action Plan process. So just keeping in mind and kind of going back a little bit in time that in 2016, 2017, there was a number of recommendations made by the Hamilton Harbor Remedial Action Plan process. And one of the recommendations was for the city of Hamilton to implement a stormwater fee. And that was really to address the non-point source pollution that was entering Hamilton Harbor that could not be dealt with via hard capital expenditures like upgrading our sewage treatment plants and things like that. So there's certainly evidence to support that a lot of the the pollutants that are now remaining in the harbor, that are still entering the harbor, could be coming from rural runoff. So I think that's something that folks need to be aware of that, and that a lot of the information can be found on the HHRAP's website as well. If you're looking for further information and you wanted to view some of those reports, they're certainly out there for public consumption.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we did have a comment here. Just one person was trying to understand how this affects rural properties that do not contribute to stormwater management needs of the cities. I feel like there's probably been a bit of discussion here, and perhaps whoever submitted this comment, if there's something specific that you are hoping to understand better, perhaps you can submit a question. But just generally, Nancy or others, is there anything else that you wanted to say around rural properties and the relation to stormwater management?
Well, I think I was just mentioning one thing. Part of the idea behind the Stormwater Incentive Program is to understand what are the barriers to property owners managing stormwater on site, and if what we're proposing, if there are barriers out there, and what we're proposing doesn't remove those barriers, then please provide comments, fill out the survey, and let us know. And as I kind of alluded to, is it having workshops? Is it having advisors or coaches come and talk to you about how you can better manage stormwater on site. But yeah, we're looking for your feedback on what we can include within the financial incentive program to help encourage better stormwater management on site.
Nothing to add, Alicia.
Sorry, Nick?
Nothing to add.
Nothing to add. Okay. Okay. We don't currently have any other open questions at this point. So I do want to just give everyone an opportunity, if there are other questions, to please add them. Perhaps while we're waiting to see if other questions come in, I do have some general sort of FAQs that we've heard from other sources so far. So this might help to spark some further thoughts. So one of the questions that we hear is, how will who will receive the stormwater fee and credit? Will it be the property owner, or perhaps a tenant if there's a tenant in that building?
Yeah, in order to keep the administration of the stormwater fee as low as possible and keep it as simple as possible, what most municipalities do, and the city of Hamilton is considering the same, is to sort of follow the water wastewater billing. So if a property already gets its water wastewater bill, instead of sending a separate fee in a separate envelope, it's just a line item within the water wastewater bill. So whoever receives the water wastewater bill would typically be the person who receives also the stormwater fee. For those properties that don't receive a water wastewater bill because they are not on city water or sanitary services, they would receive what we call a stormwater only bill, and that would typically go to the property owner unless they put in a request otherwise.
Okay. And maybe you could just speak briefly about the how people can access or how they may be able to access the grants and subsidies or apply for credits if they're eligible.
Yeah. So you want to make it as the idea is make it as simple as possible while still making sure that the credit that they're applying for is, measures that they've not only implemented but maintain on site. So what most municipalities do is, there's a form that they fill out, and it's all online, and then they have to submit typically, let's say, drawings. If it's a stormwater pond they have on site, then they have to submit the drawings and records of maintenance that has been done on the pond. And that's, so trying to make sure that enough information is provided that the city can make a just decision without making it too onerous on the property owner. And then the idea is that it would have to be renewed every few years to show that it is still being maintained. So if it's a pond, yes, 2 or 5 years later, yes, we've inspected it again, we've cleaned out the sediment again, and that way, you keep getting your credit. And we would ideally like to develop these processes over 2024 so that people can apply for their credits in advance of the fee being implemented. So that way the decisions have been made and you've got your application in. And so when the new stormwater fee hits, the credits are already applied. And there would be an appeal process. So if you didn't like the decision of the city, you could submit an appeal and the city would have to look at it.
Okay. Okay, so this is related to agricultural properties. So as a farm owner, so this person was told as a farm owner, they should fill out the industrial, commercial, and large multi-residential owner survey. My property is used for cash crops, and this is my home. So how does that work? Would they be considered an ICI owner operator or residential?
So if the only facility, the only hard surface, the only building on your site was a house and everything else was just green fields, then you would be treated like a homeowner and you would be charged one billing unit. If, however, you have barns and greenhouses and things like that, then you would be treated like a non-residential property owner, and you would be billed based, or your fee would be determined based on measured impervious area. So it sort of depends on what's on your site.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll just give one last call for questions if other people have questions. In the meantime, let's see if there's a question that we haven't addressed. Okay, we did get one in. So you say that an urban residence would have a decrease of $124, but those of us, I think that would be in the water wastewater rates. But those of us with a rural residence would be looking at a fee of $140. So you transfer the cost of an urban residence whose impervious footprint is much larger to the rural residents who do not contribute as much.
Yeah. So yeah, what we found was when we actually did the measurements of footprints of homes, we actually found that the rural homes were twice as large as the urban homes, but we didn't want to charge rural homes twice as much. So we just said, okay, let's just charge everyone one billing unit. So I wouldn't really say that urban residents have a larger footprint, and the reason that rural residents don't get a restatement in their water wastewater is that they're not contributing to stormwater. They don't pay city water and wastewater, and 70% of the funding comes from that. So currently, rural residents aren't contributing to stormwater funding through their water wastewater rates. They just contribute a small amount to stormwater funding through the property taxes. And so it's we found that the city was actually spending more in rural areas than rural properties were contributing in the area of stormwater management. So on one hand, it may seem unfair, but on the other hand, it's actually now all properties will be contributing to stormwater funding. So it's actually, one might argue, a more equitable model.
Okay, so I think you sparked some further questions there, Nancy. So I think there was just some clarification that do you mean that the rural impervious area, so outbuildings, is larger than urban, not their actual homes, or do you mean actual homes?
I would say anything to do with the home, so a house and the driveway to that house. Yeah, so I'm not including barns, but if there was a garage attached to the house, it would include that. So driveway, garage, house in rural properties was twice as large, not including agricultural buildings. That this is only for properties that were just residences.
So it's this represents an added tax to rural property owners that paid for their own well to be dug, and the electricity it costs for running the pump, or extra payments to fill up the cisterns that urban folks don't pay. How is the city recognizing these costs?
Yeah, so I think urban residents who don't have their own wells, they pay for water through their water and wastewater utility rates. So they will still have to pay for their water and wastewater utility rates. So it's not like they're not getting water and wastewater for free. It's just a restatement of the water wastewater bill. And because stormwater is coming off that bill, all they get is a reduction in the stormwater portion of that. So I know that rural property owners have to pay for their well, and likewise, urban property owners will still have to pay their water bills and will have to pay based on the amount of water they consume.
Okay, all right. So I'll just turn it back out to participants here. Any other questions for the project team this evening? And just a reminder, while we're doing that, just a reminder that the survey is available at engage.hamilton.ca/stormwater incentives. And also another reminder that we are going to be out at open houses next week. So November 15th at City Hall and November 16th at the Ancaster Fairgrounds. So maybe we'll see some of you out there.
And maybe if it's helpful, Alicia, just to let folks know that you had to pre-register for these virtual sessions so that you got the invite and you're able to join. There's no need to pre-register for the in-person open houses. They're welcome to one and all just to show up.
Yes, thank you for that. And also to note that we are going to have a question and answer period like we did here, and the question and answer period will start about 30 minutes after the start of the meeting. So just in case folks want to be part of that again. Okay, so I think we have a question here about some of the large box stores. What kind of revenue might this generate for the city from places like Walmart or any of those other big box stores?
Yeah, so it is true that if you were a store with a large parking lot and maybe a single toilet and sink in the back, you probably were not contributing a lot to stormwater funding, despite there being a lot of runoff from your site. So properties. Those types of properties will probably see an increase. And in addition, and more importantly, hopefully this will also encourage them to manage their stormwater more sustainably, and they will take measures to reduce the amount of runoff from their properties. But yes, that's exactly the idea, is that this new stormwater funding model will be more equitable, and those who generate the largest amounts of runoff will pay the most.
Yeah, and if I can jump in there too, again, for everybody's benefit, City Council has not yet, determined what the stormwater rates are going to be. That'll come in the future, including consideration for the rebate and incentive and credit programs that we're reaching out about now and looking for feedback. The recommendations from staff that have been made to City Council is we're looking at a revenue neutral implementation of a stormwater rate. And so in short, what that means is that we're not looking to make more money off of a new stormwater rate than what is presently needed to maintain our existing stormwater infrastructure and related programming. So you're really looking at the same pie. Sorry, there's the pie. And that pie is cut up differently based on the different property types, but you're not looking at making that pie bigger. I hope that's helpful.
Okay, so we don't have any other questions. So I think we can probably wrap it up at this point. Okay, this is going to be the last call. We did just get one in, so we'll stop here. We'll ask this last question and then we'll probably wrap it up at this point, unless others send in their questions as we speak. I think it's more of a comment actually than a question. So this comment is just kind of disputing the fact that rural homes are larger. Have a home that is less than 1,000 square feet and a garage of 300 square feet. My water goes into a cistern, which we use. It then goes into a septic system. So any excess water goes into a pond on the farm behind us, and from there to the 40 Mile Creek as a municipal drain.
Yeah. And the one thing I can add about that is when it comes, in order to keep this fee administratively simple. Ideally, we'd be able to measure every single property and what everyone contributes. And so when I said twice as large, that was an average, a statistical average. And so, we did measure a statistically significant number of properties to determine that. But you're right, there will be variation, and some homes will be very small and contribute very little. And so, but, instead of going out and measuring 180,000 properties individually, it was decided to kind of use averages for single family homes or duplexes and townhomes. And so, yeah, there will be some smaller homes that will be paying the same as some, their neighbor who might be slightly bigger, but the cost of making it to that level of equity would have been significantly more. And I know nobody wants to pay for someone to go out and measure every property individually.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll pause it there. And just if anybody has any other questions following this meeting, please do reach out to the team at Stormwater Funding Review at hamilton.ca. And also, please, as another reminder, visit Hamilton or engage.hamilton.ca/stormwater incentives by December 3rd to complete the survey. Or also visit hamilton.ca/stormwater funding for more information about stormwater management of the city and the stormwater fee. And perhaps consider joining the meetings next week as well. So thank you very much for joining this evening. We really appreciate your interest and your comments and your questions. And certainly we'll appreciate your input into the incentive program as well. So thank you again, and have a good evening, everyone. Take care.